Thank you. That was a very great sort of introduction to what we're really talking about here today. I'm going to talk about how we in general think about the big challenge of climate change. I would love to get up my slides if that's possible. Fundamentally, our climate policies and our energy policies are failing. I'm not an expert in Germany, and I think we're going to get 4 real experts up here afterwards and talk about that. So I'm going to talk about something else, namely get the general story right and find what is the better story. But before we get to the better story, we really have to combat what Birgit also called this doomsday event. So I'm going to take you through what I think is the better story, but we can only get people to listen to the better story if we walk them through reality first. So look, global warming, real, it's man-made, but it's often also exaggerated and one-sided. And that leaves us badly informed. That's one of the reasons why pretty much everyone believes global warming is going to be the end of the world. No, it's not. I'm going to show you just 2 things, but I'm sure I would love to talk to you afterwards about a lot of other things. Of course, I've written extensively about this, so I'm just giving you sort of 2 ideas. Wildfire, we're often told, my God, the world is burning more and more. New York Times had as its website a world on fire, and you saw this wonderful animation of a world that was literally on fire. And this is what most people think. Well, let me show you the data. We actually know how much fire has burnt the world across the last century and into the next. So in 1900, we estimated almost 4.2% of the global surface used to burn. Since then, it's dramatically declined. It's now down to almost 3%. We know this because the climate models need this as input. We're not totally certain of this because it's a historical reconstruction. But since we've had satellites, we very, very well know that we've actually seen a declining level of burn. We're now down to about 2.5 or even lower than that. Why? Because people don't like stuff burning. And so they actually make sure things don't burn. This is human ingenuity. But we need to tell our kids that. What are we expecting in the future? Actually, if we do nothing, if we have no climate policy, it'll still decline. If we have strong climate policy, yes, it will decline more. But the whole point here is to say this is not a situation where the world is burning. This is a situation where we get more and more things under control. This will be a recurrent theme in pretty much all that I'm going to be telling you. And not just because I picked out those data that just shows this. This is the general story of pretty much everything we do. Yes, there are problems ahead, but mostly we make more solutions than we make extra problems. That's why this is going down. Let me show you another thing. You hear a lot about heat waves. Actually, we had a little bit of that yesterday. But we fear a lot of the heat waves. But remember, there's also cold waves. We need to have a sense of how much does this affect us. Well, if you look at Europe, we actually know this for all nations in Europe. Heat kills, absolutely. We estimate that more than 20,000 people die each year in Europe from excessive heat. But we're not well informed if we don't also tell people that every year cold kills, and it actually kills about 10 times as many. About 220,000 people die each and every year in Europe from cold. If you look at Germany, which is just one of those bars, and I would wish I could actually point it out, but it's up there, trust me. And it basically shows that Germany sees about 4,000 people die each year from heat and 20,000 people from cold. Why is it our politicians only talk about the heat and not the cold? Of course, it's because it's much more convenient, but it doesn't make it right. We need to tell people this whole story. And of course, how do you combat heat? We know. You do that with air conditioning. Tip to the owners of this place. Well, but had we come here in the winter, we would have appreciated if you also had heating, right? And the point, of course, is both of these are possible if energy is cheap. If energy is expensive, rich people can still keep their homes heated and cooled, but poor people can't. And that's why, Biden just came out and told us, it was a week ago, this.
But extreme heat is the #1 weather-related killer in the United States.
Extreme heat is the #1 weather-related killer in the United States. New York Times tells us the same thing. Pretty much everyone tells us this. And no, it's not. But the important point is that everybody's telling us this. Extreme heat is the #1 weather-related killer in the United States. Well, if you actually look at the numbers, we have good numbers for this. About 6,000 people die, almost 6,000 people die from extreme heat every year in the US. That is certainly a number that we should take care of and be conscious of. These are people we want to save. But just remember, there's about 152,000 people that die from cold every year. That's 25 times more than the extreme heat that Biden just told us. Why are we only being told that one part of the story? Because it fits a narrative. But our goal has to be to inform people correctly. And I'm not just showing you this for Europe and the US, because you could kind of imagine that that would be true for Europe and the US, but this is also true for every continent in the world, including Africa. Many more cold deaths than heat deaths. We're surprised about this, but this is what Lancet studies show over and over again. We need to know. So the first point is really to take you away from this, oh my God, the world is ending. Remember, again, there's a reason why you only hear about all the extra fires. Because we never send TV crews down. I'm here and it's not burning, right? It's not a good story. But it does not mean that you're not well informed unless you actually know these numbers. Again, you'll see lots of pictures of people almost dying in heat, and that's all true. But you're forgetting to see all the people who anonymously, typically old people, die in their homes from cold. We need to know both. So why is it we get it so wrong on global warming? I think it's fundamentally because we forget that people are really good at adapting to their stuff. So look at this, I think, is possibly the strongest single graph that I'm going to show you. The number of people that die from climate-related disasters, so that's floods, drought, storms, and wildfires. We have pretty good data for this over the last 100 years. In the 1920s, almost 500,000 people on this planet died from these 4 disasters: floods, drought, storms, and wildfires, every year on average. If you believe the current story, you would think this would go dramatically up. Of course, I've actually I can't do that with the graph I've just shown you. So you can sort of imagine where this is going. It's dramatically dropped down. So the last 10 years, the average number of people dying from these climate-related disasters is 9,000. It's a reduction of more than 98%. This has nothing to do with climate. It has everything to do with the fact that we've lifted people out of poverty, that we've made sure we have much better technology and we have much better predictive powers. The biggest killer in the whole world was the hurricane in 1970 that hit Bangladesh that killed 300,000 people. A large part of this was because we could not get the information out. There's a hurricane coming, you better seek protection. Another part of it was because they didn't trust it. It was run by Pakistan back then. And the third thing was, if you have cattle and that's your main thing, that's what you live off of course you don't actually want to leave your cattle to get drowned, and so you're actually going to stay with your cattle. We have come so far, and this is one of the reasons why we don't die from this anymore. It's possible that without climate change, this would have been 8,000 people dying. But the important point, and the better story is, this is not going upwards, as you'd believe. It's dramatically declining. So that's why we need to understand climate is not the end of the world. It's a problem. It's something that means things get better, but slightly slower. Let me show you what I mean. What is going to be the impact of global warming? Well, we actually know there are 2 new studies out this year from one of the most quoted climate economists, Richard Tol, and the only climate economist to win the Nobel Prize in climate economics, William Nordhaus. I'm going to show you both of those studies. What they show is, if you look across the temperature rise, you can see how much impact is this going to have. There's a lot of different studies. This is all the peer-reviewed studies that we have in the world showing what's the negative impact. As you can see, as temperatures get worse and worse, higher and higher, the impact tends to get worse. This is Richard Tol's impact, the blue X that you can see up here. So if we estimate it'll be about 3 degrees warmer by the end of the century, we will see a reduction of 1.9% GDP. I'll show you what that means in just a second. Nordhaus has a slightly different assumption and shows that it's minus 3.1%. The important point here is it's not 100. It's not nowhere near 100. It's 2 to 3%. How much of a problem is that? Well, the UN estimate the average person in this world will, over the rest of the century, become 4.5 times as rich. We'll be 450% as rich, on average, as we are today. That's a fantastic story. This is the story we need to make sure our kids and grandkids hear about. But because of global warming, we're not actually going to feel like we're 450% as rich. We'll only feel like we're somewhere between 435 and 440% as rich. This is important, right? Because that's a real problem. But it's not the end of the world. This is a tiny bit less amazingly better by the end of the century. We need to tell our kids that. You don't need to be scared. You need to fix this, yeah, as one of the many things you need to fix. But of course, you have to be very careful if you're going to try to fix a 2 to 3% problem that you don't end up spending 10 to 15% fixing it, because that's a really bad deal. And that's really what our current problems are. Current climate policies, unrealistic, unsustainable. Just take a look. This is the EU's own statistics. I actually want to overlay it with Germany, but they haven't done it, but you can sort of imagine what that would look like. But fundamentally, the EU, Japan, and the UK all have much higher energy costs than anyone else. They also show it with all the others, but just to show you this, I'm just showing you the US and China, which is much, much lower. And crucially, US and China is not increasing. The EU keeps going up. It keeps creeping up. Let me just show you, and again, I don't have this data for Germany. I don't think anyone really has this, but we have great statistics for the last 200 years from the UK. And so I'm going to show you this. And this is really what we saw in the graph. Over the last 200 years, if you look at gas prices, they have declined and declined and declined. We've just gotten better and better and better at servicing people with gas until about the year 2000. And since then, it's gone up. Not the spike is the Ukraine war, but most of this increase, and the dip is the COVID, most of this increase is climate policy. We've simply decided to say we're going to make it harder for humans to do well in the world because of climate policy. Now, it's fair to say that a climate policy which does some good is also allowed to cost some money, but we need to be aware of the real trade-off. If you look at electricity, remember, electricity is the thing that drives most of our world today. It used to be phenomenally expensive. I'm actually not showing it. It goes up to about 80, so 10 times higher up around the around 1900. But I just want to show you this. So basically, again, it came down to just after 2000, and then since then, it's dramatically increased. We are making the lifeblood of civilization more expensive. It's fine to do something about climate change. It's not okay to do something that's dumb. This is what we need to recognize, that we believe in. We have this idea that, oh, we're going to go renewable. Remember, the world used to be incredibly renewable. In 1800, most of the world was run on renewable. We estimate about 94% of the world ran on renewable. It was really only the UK that started using coal by then. Then we've spent the last 200 years getting rid of renewables, right? The last 50 years, we stayed at about 13 to 14% of global energy from renewables. This was mainly poor countries cooking and keeping warm with dirty fuels like wood, dung, carbon, and so on. What you see since 2010 is all of the impact of our climate policies. We believe that we're incredibly renewable. We've seen a slight increase from 13, 14%. We're now up to 16%. A lot of politicians will tell you, oh, we're going to go renewable by 2050 or even 2030. It gives you sort of a sense of how ridiculous that is, given the current set. But if you actually look at the two primary organizations that look at this, so the International Energy Agency and the Biden's Energy Information Administration, this is what they believe. We're going to get somewhere between 26 and 34%. Sorry, I can't remember. If you look at how long that'll take to get to 100%, that's in the middle of next century to the middle of 2 centuries from now. So we're somewhere around 150 to 250 years away from being 100% renewable. We're not anywhere near, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. I just want to share this one thing that I actually did on Germany. Germany's very proud that it's actually tried to get rid of fossil fuels, so it's gone from a share of almost 100% down to about 80%. And I actually know the exact number because that'll turn out to be very important for the story. It's 79.6% of Germany's energy in 2010 came from fossil fuels. And since then, when they decided the Energiewende and spent $500 billion euros on this, you have managed to not get anywhere. This is actually 79.3%. That's why I needed the point. Right, the trend will end in zero in about 2,500. So good luck with that. This shows you that we're basically making fantasy arguments. Oh, we're going to go all net zero and all that stuff. No, you're not. Remember, if you do climate policy, yeah, climate has costs. That's real. But climate policy also have costs. And those are the things we need to weigh against each other. We've actually never had estimates of what net zero will cost until last year in Climate Change Economics, which is a period economics journal where Robert Mendelsohn at Yale University gathered a lot of the world's preeminent climate economists to estimate what is the cost of net zero by 2050. This was the benefit. The benefit is a substantial $4.5 trillion on average across the world, across the 21st century. That's a substantial amount of money. This is why climate change is a real problem. It's something that we should be aware of and think about how we fix smartly. Unfortunately, it turns out the cost is phenomenally larger. It's $27 trillion. That's about a quarter of global GDP each and every year throughout the 21st century. That's not a smart thing to do. This is what our politicians are arguing that we should be doing, and this is what's dumb. We need to walk people through that whole conversation. Look, it's not the end of the world, it's a problem. And you also need to get a sense of it's not we're not all going to be poor by the end of the century, we're going to be phenomenally much richer, but we'll be slightly less phenomenally richer. And the current policies are dumb beyond belief, and we won't be able to afford them. And this is the kind of thing that makes people vote for Trump, right? So the point here is, if you actually want to do it smartly, what should you do? And that's what I'm going to, oh, wow, I had 1 second left. So I'm actually going to go, literally, I'm going to go 1 minute over. So we know what works and what doesn't. We know the EU 2020 climate policy, one of the best studied policies. For every dollar you spend, or let me just say in euros, but it says up there in dollars, it's the same thing. For every euro you spend, you will do 3 euro cents of climate benefits. That's a bad deal. That's a bad way to help the world. If you do the net zero, the one I just showed you, for every euro spent, you'll do 17 euro cents of good. That's also a dumb idea. But there are smart ways. If we do a smart global CO2 tax, any economist would tell you that's a good idea. It's very unlikely that we can actually swing this. It's very unlikely that we can get Russia on board. It's probably also unlikely we can get China on board. But in principle, this would be a good idea. It would also be fantastically costly. And that's why we estimate for every euro you spend, you'll do about 2 euros of good. So it's something we should consider, but we should also be very wary of whether we can actually implement it. But by far the best solution, and this is the solution that's always been the best solution, is green energy innovation. Remember, every problem that humanity has solved has always been about innovation. We have never succeeded in saying, I'm sorry, would you mind if you were a little poorer and a little less comfortable and a little colder in the winter and a little warm in the summer, but at least we'll be doing a little bit for climate change. That surprisingly doesn't go over very well in elections. We're not going to be able to do this. What we will be able to do is to innovate future green energy to be so cheap that not just rich, well-meaning Germans, but also Chinese and Indians and Africans will want to do this. This is the solution. We know this from economics, but it also happens to be the better story. And it's not just the better story in the sense of we have a solution, but it's the better story all the way through, that we can take kids out of being scared, we can get them to understand what works, and say we actually know what the solution is. Why don't we do that? Thank you.